Welcome, seekers of hidden knowledge, to the mystical realm of the occult. Delve into the secrets of the universe as we journey together into the enigmatic world of ancient wisdom. Brought to you by your guide through the shadows of enlightenment, Wisdom Rocker. Uncover the mysteries, unlock the power, and journey with us as we explore the hidden depths within the pages of forgotten scrolls and ancient texts. Prepare to embark on a journey beyond the ordinary, where wisdom transcends time and knowledge is your greatest ally. Welcome to Wisdom Rocker. Prepare to awaken your inner sage. In this video, we will be uncovering the wisdom within the chapters of
Lectures on Ancient Philosophy. Written by Manly P. Hall. Chapter 18. The Ladder of the Gods. With his opened eye the Dangma, or initiated disciple, beholds as a grand staircase the concatenated order of worlds that extends upward from the material darkness, which is the mundane sphere, and disappears into that impenetrable spiritual darkness which is the abiding state of the first divinity. The midmost portion of this staircase is illumined by the light of reason, but its extremities are rendered incomprehensible by a Stygian gloom. This flight of worlds rests upon Earth's lurid base, and the first steps are slimy with the fetid rot of matter. Rising in many levels from this ignoble footing, the stairway of spheres vanishes into the very presence of transcendent cause, whose blinding radiance, ill-concealed by 7,000 veils, is to man's unordered vision an utter lightlessness. This is the mystic ladder of Jacob's vision upon which the patriarch beheld the angelic choirs. Two great streams of souls move upon this symbolic staircase, one ascending and the other descending, impelled by the rhythm of generation. Virgin spirits, eternal with the fullness of God, emerge from behind the veils that cover the threefold darkness above, and swooping downward with bird-like speed are enveloped in the noxious vapors of mortality. Of this descent Plotinus writes, and thus, the soul, though of divine origin and proceeding from the regions on high, becomes merged in the dark receptacle of body, and being naturally a posterior god, it descends hither through a certain voluntary inclination, for the sake of power and of adorning inferior concerns. Hence, if it swiftly flies from hence, it will suffer no injury from its revolt, since by this means it receives a knowledge of evil, unfolds its latent powers, and exhibits a variety of operations peculiar to its nature, which by perpetually abiding in an incorporeal habit and never proceeding into energy, would have been bestowed in vain. Entering the inferior gloom, these souls are swallowed up in the living death of the body. This mystery was revealed by the secret rites of the Phrygians, as evidenced by Hippolytus. Hence Heraclitus declares that we live the death of the soul and die the life of the soul, thus arcanely intimating that when the rational nature agitates the irrational nature, bestowing upon it the semblance of life, it sacrifices its own life and only regains liberty by retiring from the concerns of the outer organism. Lamenting the unaccustomed state in which his soul found itself in form, Empedocles declares that the process of generation causes the living to pass into the dead. From below mount upward the redeemed, whose natures, increasingly luminous, shine like stars in a Cimmerian night. From the dismal underworld, the abode of vain fears and terrible regrets, moves an endless file, climbing steadily toward God up the steps, or worlds, of its salvation. Thus, the illustrious ones who are approaching the summit of their tedious climb, are in the terms of Plato, raised above all inferior good. Concerning the return of the liberated soul to its virgin nature, H. P. Blavatsky writes, this is the state which such seers as Plotinus and Apollonius termed the union to the deity, which the ancient yogins called Isvara and the modern call Samadhi. But this state is as far above modern clairvoyance as the stars above glowworms. Plotinus, as is well known, was a clairvoyant seer during his whole and daily life, and yet, he had been united to his God but 6 times during the 66 years of his existence, as he himself confessed to Porphyry. From the foregoing it is evident that the soul for many ages alternately retires from and approaches divinity, only stabilizing its nature after being completely disentangled from the concerns of the flesh. It is not intended that mortal man should as yet be constant in his power to behold the perfect face, but that strengthened by intermittent vision he shall strive with greater temerity to establish the continuity of the spiritual perceptions. From the many levels, which together form the vast staircase, pour forth lives in quest of forms and forms in quest of life. From the pits of mortal slime crawl repulsive creatures whose sightless eyes are unresponsive to the light. Slowly, painfully, awkwardly, these half-animate monstrosities obey the deep-hidden urge of an imprisoned soul and grope their way toward truth. From the dark fastnesses of the mist-reeking jungle come forth the slinking horrors whose claws are death and whose bared fangs were fashioned to rend and tear. Then from the broad plains come the patient, sad-eyed, serving brutes, which see and feel but cannot understand. From the dark caves of earth's primal day emerges the dim progenitor of man who, beating his hairy breast with crude, misshapen hands, emitted the first war cry of his kind. The distant places also give up their savage hordes, for Slayer and Savior alike are marching on through the ages toward inevitable perfection. Breaking the shackles that bind them to the grindstones of the mighty, the slaves join the great processional, as do the merchants who barter and sell and the thieves who scheme and steal. From their marble tombs rise up the spirits of the hero dead, the Caesars and the Alexanders, and from their honored crypts come forth prince and potentate bearing orb and scepter, and gathering their ermine robes about them they solemnly climb the stairs of space. Higher upon the great flight are the scientists and the philosophers, who in pensive mood plod the weary way. At the very point where the staircase disappears into the mysterious presence of the ineffable stand the radiant saviors, the great teachers of humanity, who dimly visible for a moment, pass into the darkness of God. Awesome is the spectacle of this grand march, souls moving toward their Maker, passing from form to form in the endless quest for the formless, approaching ever nearer to that greatness which is the virtue of perfection. Though an infinite diversity confronts the eye, yet the whole mystery may be summed up in 3 short words: God seeking God. Philosophy does not give the soul freedom from universal law. In the doctrine of the mean, it is written, the heavenly appointment of life is called nature, and accordance with human nature is called the way, and the regulation of the way is called religion. From the Confucian ethics as revealed in the 4 books, the power exercised by Buddhism is largely due to the magnificent concept promulgated by it concerning the march of the self to perfection. Oppressed by the irksomeness of their tasks and rendered hopeless by the ignobility of their station, the Sudras of India were victimized by a decadent Brahmanism. Following the letter and not the spirit of Manu's law, the holy-born sedulously avoided contact with inferiors lest the pollution of promiscuous relationships endanger that state of sanctity in which their Brahman souls reposed. That golden age had passed when rich in royal worth and valor, rich in holy Vedic lore, the head-born were the virtuous stewards of the gods. In the Kshitaswayamvara of the Ramayana is described a noble Brahmin king who ruled the righteous city, Ayodhya. Like the ancient monarch Manu, father of the human race, Dashratha ruled his people with a father's loving grace. Truth and justice swayed each action and each baser motive quelled. People's love and monarch's duty every thought and deed impelled. A superfluity of laws often proves more detrimental than an insufficiency of laws. In the service of their countless statutes the Brahmins became oppressors of life. Themselves subservient to the cumbersome regulations which they had prescribed for others, the Brahmins also suffered from a plenitude of codes which regulated thought and action until life was reduced to a mere span of forms and conventions. But while the holy Brahmin enjoyed a certain uncomfortable security, the Sudra, bereft even of hope, found his lot little better than that of the beast. The gods presumably were too busily engaged in answering the unceasing prayers of the twice-born pious to lend an ear to the supplications of the lowly. To these victims a misinterpreted caste system Buddhism brought the inspiring doctrine of freedom in bondage. While the Sudra could not throw off the metaphorical shackles that bound his physical members, he did free his inner and immortal self from the concepts of limitation and despair. Buddhism revealed the stairway of the immortals, and through this doctrine, which verges on metaphysical evolution, gave hope of ultimate accomplishment to those millions for whom present accomplishment was impossible. Inspired by this new hope, those who previously had cursed their tragic lot sang at their tasks, those who had looked forward to a life of pain smiled through their tears, and those who had faced eternity with fear and trembling were rendered strong by the knowledge of life's purpose. The miseries of the today were forgotten, and men dwelt together in a glorious tomorrow. The lowly uncaste sensed the Brahman within his frame, for to the sinner had been revealed the hidden saint within. Indra's city vanished from the sky, the gods were dissipated like mist before the dawn of reason, only self remained, the glorious universal self, the one who is in all, the all which is in each. Rising up against their heavenly despots and emancipating themselves from the hierarchies of fears they had worshipped, the Sudras declared themselves free men of the universe. Thus, the letter gave place again to the spirit, and human beings faced their own thoughts and actions unafraid. Armed with the tools of the noble path, each true believer hewed an appropriate destiny from the eternal substances of being. Recognizing his state to signify that of greatest separateness, the Sudra began to ascend the ladder of diversity, finally raising himself to unity upon its several rungs. True philosophy inspires with the courage to accomplish and equips with the patience to wait. It reveals not only the end, but also the means to that end. Philosophy is indeed a mystical ladder up which men climb from ignorance to reason. Its rungs are the arts and sciences, and he who ascends the whole of the way finds that its upper extremity rests in the substances of an invisible but most substantial world, the proper abode of the wise. Here are the groves of learning where the sages sit together musing upon consequential. This is a sphere of peace, for with depth of learning wrangling ceases and the thoughtful mind to solitude retires. This is indeed the place of the Isurim, or blessed souls, of which the rabbins dreamed and where the Kachim pondered over the great sod. For it is written in the Proverbs, and his sod are for the Isurim. Fear not, admonished Pythagoras in the golden verses, men come from a heavenly race and are taught by a diviner nature that which they should accept and that which they should reject. Philo Judaeus describes the allegorical ladder which is raised from earth to heaven, showing its macrocosmic analogies and its application to the microcosm, or man. This ladder, according to Philo, is of the world its astral part and of man the soul, the foot of which is, as it were, its earthly part, namely, sensation, while its head is, as it were, its heavenly part, the purest mind. Upon this ladder move what Philo terms the logi, which may be interpreted as thither the words or, more generally, the gods. To these words or gods is ascribed a very secret and wonderful meaning. In the chapter on the annihilation of the sense of diversity we have already described the spheres of realization, or consciousness, which man causes to manifest out of his own potentialities. The level of integrity upon which the individual functions is his level or sphere of consciousness, and each of these levels or spheres, when considered as a whole, is a god or word of power moving upon the ladder. Thus, Philo declares that when the logi ascend they draw the ladder, or soul, up with them, which arcanely intimates two things: 1, that the gods or words cannot descend other than by the soul, and having once perfected the soul lose contact with the world; 2, that the soul in its ascent absorbs inferior natures into itself so that as it rises there is nothing left beneath it. The golden verses conclude, "Thy mind's reins let reason guide. then stripped of flesh up to free ether soar, a deathless God, divine, mortal no more. In his dream Jacob beheld a mysterious ladder with its foot upon the earth and its top extending upward into the divine sphere. In the mysteries it is declared that 72 eons, or angels, moved upon the ladder. These angels are the 72 names or powers that emanate from Shem HaMepharash, the separate and ineffable deity. Ibn Ezra, writing in the 12th century, states on the authority of Ibn Jabral that the ladder which Jacob saw in his dream signified the superior, or rational soul, and that the angels of Elohim which ascend and descend thereon are the abstract thoughts of wisdom which attach themselves at the same time, both to a spiritual, or superior subject and also to the corporeal and inferior. The word which has been rendered ladder is salam, which means that which is piled into a heap, raised up or lifted, and it is upon this raised or exalted place that the Malawi Elohim moved up and down. We cannot do better than consider the meaning of the word salam as here employed. Albert Pike states that in archaic Hebrew there was no word to designate a pyramid. In the word Jerusalem, for example, salam is generally interpreted to mean peace, and Melchizedek, the prince of Salem, was called the Lord of Peace. It might be more accurate, however, to replace the word peace with exalted or lifted, in which event Jerusalem could be interpreted to mean the city of the ladder. In this connection the fact should not be overlooked that Muhammad on his night journey to heaven, after arriving at Jerusalem on Al-Barak, beheld a ladder formed of golden rope descending from heaven. The lower end of this ladder rested upon Mount Moriah, and climbing the swaying stair the Prophet of Islam entered into the very presence of the living but many-veiled God. In the ancient wisdom it was also declared that the sacred mountains of the world rose in 7 steps or stages, as the Meru of the Hindus, and it was from the high place, or the 7th step, that offerings were made to the Lord whose name is blessed. Not only did the holy place rise in 7 platforms or levels, but upon its topmost level was usually erected a triform symbol of the divine nature itself. Thus, the 7 steps, complemented by this threefold figure, became the mysterious Pythagorean decad, or the symbol of the tenfold order of the universe. Jacob's ladder then actually becomes the symbolic mountain or pyramid. Pyramids, wherever found, are symbolic of the axis mountain of the world, the Olympus, Asgard, and Meru of the pagans, and possibly the rock Moriah upon which the temple stood at Jerusalem. In his pagan idolatry, Faber describes the Mithraic ladder used in the initiatory rites of the Persian mysteries, which he affirms was in reality a pyramid of 7 steps, further declaring that on each step was a door. In the ceremonials, the neophyte climbed the pyramid, passing through the 7 doors, and then through similar portals descended on the opposite side. This pyramid was symbolic of both the world and the sidereal system. Nearly all great buildings of antiquity were symbolic of the universe, and according to Cicero the conquering Xerxes destroyed the temples of the Greeks, declaring that the entire world was the proper house of God and that deity was profaned when man prepared for him a house less dignified than his own solar mansion. Celsus gives a certain key to the ceremonials of the Mithraic rite, but of these mysteries comparatively little is known. Having passed successfully through the dangers imposed by his initiators, the candidate was invested with a great cape either embroidered or painted with stars and with the constellations of the zodiac ornamenting the hem. Like the starry hat of Hades, these star-strewn cloaks signified the soul in its highest and most causal aspect. Thus, by the mysteries a heavenly nature was conferred, and men who formerly dwelt about the earth itself were raised to a heavenly abode and their whole natures invested with celestial raiment. The corporeal body was transmuted by the mysteries into a celestial body, for men who had previously enveloped themselves in the dark garments of form and now put on a more luminous garb resplendent with the heavenly lights. Above the earth are the planets, above the planets are the stars. Uninitiated mortals exist in physical natures limited to the concerns of the earth and are termed material because their rational natures are in servitude to a mortal constitution. Disciples are those who take upon themselves the striped garments of the planets, the cloak of many colors whose shades denote the aspects of the astral soul. When the aspirant has transcended the concerns of the planets and risen through their orbits to liberation, he then assumes the starry clothing of the firmament. Thus, the stars are symbols of spirit, the planets of soul and the elements of body. Herein lies the explanation for the three-runged ladder which unites heaven and earth. The rungs of this ladder are the three mysteries perpetuated in Freemasonry as the Blue Lodge. The lowest round is physical, the second emotional and the third mental, for it was written in the ancient work, "Our thoughts are from the stars, our emotions from the planets and our forms from the earth." Entering the chamber of the Mithraic rites, the candidate found himself in a great cavern either formed by natural means or hewn from solid rock by the priests. In the center of the cavern stood a pyramid rising in 7 steps, each of its levels painted a different color. In some cases, the pyramid was divided into definite platforms, in others a narrow spiral pathway wound from base to summit as in the Chaldean ziggurats or astronomical towers. From the flight of steps leading up the face of the pyramid, access to the various planes or levels was had through low gates, each composed of a different metal. The description given by Celsus of these metals is probably a blind, for the ancients followed a definite system which he has deviated from. Conducted by the Hierophant who discoursed to him concerning the mysteries as he progressed, the neophyte ascended the steps of the pyramid, first entering through a silver gate onto the platform of the moon. Beyond was another gate resembling brass, which was that of Mercury, and still farther on a third gate of copper sacred to Venus. The fourth gate was of gold, the fifth of iron, the sixth of tin and the seventh and last, of lead. After passing through these gates, the neophyte found himself upon a flat square area and before him a triangular altar upon which burned 3 fires. The master of the rite then explained that by this ascent was revealed the felicity of liberated souls, the joyous upward motion of lives toward their sovereign cause. That passing from one plane to another, the candidate had recapitulated the after-death process by which his superphysical constitution verged away from matter and inclined itself toward the immaterial foundation which is in the heavens and concealed from the profane by the leaden ramparts of Saturn. In his climb the aspirant had actually stepped from planet to planet, leaving behind him the inferior spheres, finally to approach proximity to that threefold fire, the triform flame of unimaginable being that burns forever and a day upon the glorious altar of universal reality. Learn, O my son, the master continued, the mystery of the ever-burning fire whose triple wick dipped in an inexhaustible fuel burns with steady luminosity throughout all the eons. The first flame is universal life, the second universal light and the third universal motion, and these together are one flame. God is a blinding light and a consuming fire, for his light is eternal reason which renders all things visible and comprehensible. Light the lamp of your own mind upon this altar of eternal mind, that the reason which is in all things may call forth the reason that is in you. When the lamp of your reason is lighted, all things become evident, the dark mysteries of life are dissipated and the glow of realization causes all secrets to reveal themselves and all hidden works to be made manifest. The base of this pyramid is square. It is your body. Its 4 elements combine to produce the mystic cube called man. The 7 steps are your senses by which the within comes to know the without and which the without climbs, even as a ladder, to discover the within. Consciousness, ascending the ladder of the senses, finally brings its message to the inner nature. The threefold flame here is the one, the beautiful and the good, which together are the light of equality, the torch of reason and the magical fire the magician must carry if he would invoke the dread person of deity. Upon the other side of this pyramid the stairs descend into the darkness of the cavern below. The candidate follows his initiator down again into the darkness of the subterranean room. Having passed through the metallic gates and standing once more at the base of the pyramid, the initiator resumes. This descent signifies the soul departing from its state of felicity and, after passing downward through the gates of the seven spheres, taking upon itself the sorrows of birth. In the gloomy cavern of the world, uninitiated men and women struggle vainly against the inevitable reactions of their own ignorance. Seeking permanence in an impermanent sphere, they suffer without respite, and their lot is indeed desperate. But those who by rational procedure have discovered the pyramidal nature of creation and learned to know the order of divine procedure whereby man ascends and descends the steps of destiny, such can no longer be bound to the untranquil sphere, but abiding therein a little while and tolerating its sorrows, prepare themselves for a more auspicious day by inclining their minds to reason. By these mysteries, then, is arcanely revealed the order of life, and by this pyramid the procedure of life. He who accepts the mystery into himself and ponders its meaning will be rewarded for his industry by the realization of sidereal order. We are ever walking up and down the steps of space, descending either from a more blissful state into one of uncertainty, or ascending from an uncertain state into one of blessed felicity. He who comprehends the wisdom of this divine motion will realize that God is ever drawing lives to himself that they may partake of the fullness of his inspiration, and then casting them from him again, that through great need they may learn to value the fullness of that inspiration. From the presence of the unchanging One there pours ever downward through the substances of the invisible world a host of souls moving inevitably into birth, while from the world of visible and tangible physical things there comes a host of souls pouring into death. Those coming into life descend the ladder, and those coming into death ascend the ladder, for death brings the soul nearer to God than does birth. Through the mysteries there pours still another stream, that exalted order which ascends the great pyramid to descend no more, who upon reaching the fiery altar upon its summit cast themselves into the eternal flame, and from their own natures feed its eternal hunger. In his chemical marriage, Christian Rosenkreutz describes the vision of C as he slept shackled in the antechamber of the house of initiation. In his dream C beheld the strange sight of a multitude of persons suspended from heaven by cords. In an early Rosicrucian book which I examined some years ago, the subject of these hanging men was elucidated in detail. The dangling figures are the sophists, those false learners who ever seek to climb to heaven upon their own suppositions. We are all supported by our beliefs, held up as it were by the strength of our premises and the sufficiency of our postulations. Yet in all too many instances how slender and inadequate is the thread of mortal reason to which we trust our weight. Among the sons of Islam there is an ancient fable to the effect that there shall come forth a prophet who will stretch a hair from the Mount of Olives to the Golden Gate of Jerusalem, and using it for a bridge will walk across the valley of Jehoshaphat, or the place of death. The hair, according to the Kabbalah, is the symbol of the glory of God and the countless diversity of his mercy. Taking this fable in its literal sense, a Mohammedan fanatic wove a rope of human hair and essayed the feat but was killed. In the legend of Christian Rosenkreutz it is further stated that an aged man, who represents Cronus, or time, the justifier of all actions, flew in and out among the hanging sophists. Wearing an hourglass tied to the top of his head and carrying in his hand a pair of sharp shears, the divine iconoclast would fly up behind any of the worldly wise men who climbed too ambitiously up their swaying ropes and cut away their slender support. Another observation by the author of The Chemical Marriage is to the effect that the higher these false learners climbed, the harder and more disastrous was their fall, so that many were dashed to pieces. The more prudent ones, however, realizing the insecurity of their position, remained close to the earth and suffered comparatively little harm when their cords were cut, often alighting uninjured upon their feet. We all share in common the desire to climb to heaven up the ladder of our own convictions, and believing ourselves to be infallible, we set out to storm the gates of the eternal. No spectacle is more pathetic than that of the individual who, led to false and dizzy heights by his egotism, has been dashed therefrom into the depths of misery and disillusionment. The more we depend upon the false, the more we suffer when that falseness is exposed. The story of the hanging men is evidently concerned with the effort to ridicule those Aristotelian schoolmen whose fallacies were already apparent at the beginning of the 17th century. Elevated above their fellow men by vain assertions and maintaining themselves by subterfuge and equivocation, these pedants preyed upon the credulity of an illiterate age. But time was finding them out, for science, rising out of this protest against intellectual pettifoggery, furnished Cronus with the shears wherewith to cut down the scholastic befogger of issues. In this allegory heaven is used to signify the sphere of the truly learned, for it was presumed that those whose knowledge was sufficient dwelt in a state of tranquillity far above the abode of ordinary mortals tormented by doubt and rendered impotent by ignorance. The light of tranquillity, as the followers of Bohm might call it, radiates from the paradisiac sphere of the contented. Humanity moves instinctively toward that tranquil state of the philosophic blessed, for we incline toward that person or condition which radiates happiness. This instinct has been shamelessly exploited in the name of religion, but the age of empty promises is closed. Having vainly sought happiness among the dictums of faith and in the company of the so-called holy, the individual is coming to realize that peace lies only within himself. In Dryden's translation of the Aeneid are found several significant copper engravings, one particularly showing a genius cutting the slender thread of life connecting mortal man with his divine origin. A small plate also showing this thread issuing from the crown of the head and disappearing upward into a cloud of divine radiance is to be found in Michael Meyer's Scrutinium Chemicum. Various modifications of this idea constituted a favorite theme of the medieval emblem writers, especially such as were in touch with the Rosicrucian activities. This thread rising from the head is the Platonic cord, a fine hypothetical line which unites the personality to its own causal part. According to the Hermetic axiom of analogy, as the spirit and body of man are connected by a thread, so heaven and earth, the spirit and body of the solar man, are united by this swaying ladder which, lowered from above, becomes the way of souls descending into life. Cronus with his reaping scythe is the guardian of this rope, and at his will the line is severed and all the objective nature dissociated from its causal principle. This thread, then, is Bifrost, the bridge of the gods, over the immortals, like the Aesir of Scandinavia, crossed before its final severance when returning to their sacred castle. Like the builders of the fated Tower of Babel, the worldly wise men of C.R.C.'s vision sought to elevate personality above principle and draw the body above its own source, hence their ultimate discomfiture. By attempting to elevate an impermanent nature to a divine state, they attempted the impossible, and so death, the master of processes, cut down each one in turn, for that man does not exist who shall be empowered to reach heaven in his physical nature. The cords are the faith and power that sustain the individual during the prime of his life, but like life itself, power is a physical uncertainty in neither wealth, position, nor physical knowledge can support the soul in that dread extremity which men are pleased to term death. In his vision of the Apocalypse, the initiate, known to the Christians as Saint John the Divine, experienced in his ascent to heaven the spiritual mystery of climbing upward through the 7 congregations or churches which are in Asia, finally coming to the door in the heavenly vault and passing through into the Empyrean to find himself in the presence of the Lord of the Cherubim and the Paschal Lamb. Saint John is described as being in the spirit a good old Neoplatonic term. From this we are to infer that the Gnostic initiate had learned the mystery of the rope swinging from heaven, for according to tradition he had climbed his way hand over hand in approved nautical fashion. Muhammad, a prudent man of more portly build, overtaxed the meager facilities of a knotted rope and consequently employed, if we are to believe the accounts, a safer and more commodious rope ladder in his ascent. In substance, however, the experiences of the two initiates were practically identical, and though slight differences exist in the terminology of the symbolism, nevertheless the principle involved demonstrates that both men had been initiated, St. John presumably by the Gnostics and Muhammad by the Nestorian Christians. St. John the Divine employed 7 great Asiatic cities to symbolize the spiritual knots or ganglia, which placed at intervals along the rope assisted the climber in his difficult task. Muhammad's rope ladder was of golden cords, and its rungs presumably were fashioned from the substances of the 7 worlds. He was forced, it is said, to stop at each of the 7 gates to receive the adoration of the patriarchs, who had apparently waited since their demise for his coming. There is also an East Indian fable of the goddess Kundalini who, being of an inquisitive mind and seeing a rope hanging from heaven with its lower end concealed in impenetrable gloom, decided to climb down this rope and investigate the unknown darkness below. Having descended the rope for an incalculable period, Kundalini discovered that its lower end rested upon an island that seemed to float in the midst of a great sea of darkness. While exploring this strange island, the rope was cut from above and Kundalini was left floating in the midst of a vast ocean. In terror the goddess ran and hid herself in a cave and refused to come out. In the secret teachings it is revealed that she could be induced to come forth from her asylum only by an aggregation of wise men who with offerings, supplications, and grave discoursing finally persuaded her to leave her gloomy retreat. The goddess Kundalini is the spirit fire that descends the mysterious ladder, which is here emblematic of the umbilical cord. When this cord is cut, the goddess is left stranded in the underworld. Alarmed, she hides in the great cavern of the sacral plexus, there to remain coiled up as a serpent, as her name implies, until the sage can lure her forth again by holy observances. Never should we lose sight of the relationship between the processes of the physical body and the universal orders. The umbilical cord is not only the divine ladder in the case of the goddess Kundalini but is symbolic also of that spiritual cord by which man is ever suspended from his divine parent. While man's outer nature is nourished by physical food and drink, his inner nature receives life from the universal parent transmitted by means of ethereal cords analogous to the umbilicus. In the Shinto mysteries of Japan, the luring of an obstinate goddess from her pout was a grave problem. The goddess of the sun, Amaterasu Omikami, had quarreled with the other celestials and giving vent to her anger hied herself, light and all, into a dark cavern, thus, leaving the heavenly world in a condition of deplorable gloom. Realizing that the temperament of the goddess was endangering the whole order of creation, the immortals finally lured her forth by a stratagem which appealed to her vanity. They fashioned a great mirror even as the Titans polished the surface of the universe that Bacchus might see his face therein. Standing this mirror in front of the cavern, they made a great ado as though in celebration of some fortuitous circumstance. Chagrined at the thought that the gods could be happy without her, Amaterasu came to the cavern entrance and peered out to discover the cause of their merriment. As she looked, she saw her own face, surrounded by a halo of light, reflected in the mirror. Wondering who this radiant person could be and terrified by the possibility that the gods had somewhere discovered a new sun goddess, Amaterasu slowly approached the entrance of the cave, only to see the radiant figure in the mirror also increasing in splendor. At last, overcome by her jealousy, she dashed from the cave to discomfit the rival sun goddess, whereupon the other celestials who had gathered above the cavern entrance dropped a net over the irate goddess as she rushed forth, thereby preventing her escape and ensuring that the sun should again light the world. Amaterasu and her mirror are household words in every Shinto home, and even the august imperial line regards the sun goddess as its founder, and her mirror is carried in the coronation ceremonials. The luring of the light out of darkness is an allegory frequently employed by many ancient writers on mysticism. It represents the effort of material man to evoke, by discipline and fetish, that lucid or rational part of himself which for some temperamental reason refuses to make itself known. Offended by the crassness of the outer life, the aesthetic and superphysical attributes of the soul retire into the uttermost recesses of the nature, there to await that more auspicious day when the awakening individual will concern himself with the nobler issues of life. The sages who ponder the problem of enticing the goddess from retirement signify the rational mind, the gods, and the intuitive instincts, while the priest represents the regenerated emotions. All these, holding solemn conclave together, finally lure the rational soul from its dark abode that its radiance may benefit the whole life. The invoking of the soul is possible only to those who have assumed the great work and resolved to live with the concerns of the spirit paramount. Through virtue, integrity, and aesthetics the soul life is thus caused to diffuse its power throughout the nature, thereby quickening the parts and rendering the whole more responsive to divine impulse. From a consideration of these various allegories it becomes evident that the latter signifies the thread or cord from which the generating soul is suspended from its monadic, or ungenerated part. The God of the philosophic elect is not technically a being, but rather this monad, or universal self. Approach to deity is, consequently, the elevation of the life to unity with its monadic cause. The abode of this monad is the true heaven world, for heaven merely signifies the state of the one divorced from all quality or condition whatsoever and abiding in the felicity of its own nature, without beginning and without end. Thus, the ascent of the ladder and the climbing of the knotted cord are both emblematic of man's ceaseless climb toward self. It is the retirement of life along the lines of its own first emanation, the natural ascent of the wise to wisdom, the virtuous to virtue, the beautiful to beauty and the good to the enduring state of good. The latter, then, bridges that mysterious fourth-dimensional interval of quality described in Chapter 10. It is the symbolic figure under which are concealed the tedious processes of crossing that vast interval between diversity and unity. The latter is the bridge of reason, the way of the gods. The stepped pyramid is significant of man's instinctive urge to build toward cause, and all action which tends to elevate, ennoble, or perfect may be conceived of as pyramidal, diagrammatically considered. Thus, in his discourse to his son on initiation, Hermes declares that the heart was built like a pyramid in that the heart is the seat of aspiration and aspiration is the universal building power. As the unknown God dwelt within the deepest recesses of the Great Pyramid, so a mysterious spirit dwells within the heart, man's house of the hidden places. The pyramid builders differed from all other architects because of the purpose for which their edifices were constructed. All men are builders, a few in permanent things, the many in impermanent things. Street. Paul calls himself a master builder, by which he intimated that he had been initiated into that body of elect artisans banded together to the erection of everlasting houses. The pyramid thus became the symbol of those called together by an inner rationality who, moved by a divine intelligence, heaped up realities that they might form mountains, as it were, up which the aspiring soul could climb in its search for heaven. While many were cutters of stone, hewers of wood and carriers of water, they were but apprentices of the noble art, not having heard as yet the call that inclines the soul away from temporal accomplishments to the building of those enduring monuments to qualities and convictions. The mystic masons, so we are told, built their lodges either upon the mountain tops or deep in the valleys, thus, obscurely intimating that the mysteries, while in their own nature lofty institutions, in the service of mankind descended into the depths of matter to effect the redemption of the human soul. God appeared to the patriarchs as a cloud over some lofty mountain top, and his voice thundered among the summits. These sacred mountains, hovering places of the Most High, are the sanctified pyramids. These pyramids, in turn, are rationalized natures, the chief accomplishment of the master builders. They are altars set up in the wilderness to signify that integrity has been established in a sphere to which integrity was once foreign. An ancient fable, in describing the stature of one whom God has thus anointed and lifted up into the assemblage of the illumined, declares that his face shone like the sun and all the brightness of the stars was in his eyes. The flow of his hair was like the rippling waves of great rivers, and even his breath was as the soft breeze of spring sighing among the trees. Though his body was that of a man, his inner nature was as vast as the world, and his integrity rose like a mighty mountain whose summit is forever hidden by the clouds of meditation. The laughter of this perfected one sounded like the song of the waterfall, yet his sorrow was like the cool of evening among the shelter of the trees. All the beauties of the universe were invoked to define his virtues, and the immensities of space belittled his greatness. It follows that when such an illumined nature heaps together the stones of its accomplishment and forms there from the altar of its God, a high and holy place suitable for the reception of the eternal, the rational soul, invoked by these accomplishments, lends its power to the convocation of perfected faculties. Then, like the awful Hierophant of Revelation, the rational self stands in splendid majesty in the midst of the flaming candles. Thus, all natures are symbolic ladders, for by ascending the concatenated orders of his own intelligence man comes proximate to his own rational and enduring part. The allegory of Jack and the Beanstalk, which like so many other children's fables has its origin in primitive folklore, well describes the mystery of the ladder. The beanstalk, which in a single night grew up to heaven, reminds one of the fabled mango tree of the elusive Hindu Mahatma, or the rope thrown into the air which does not fall. The miraculous growth of the magician's plant signifies the culturing of the soul. Every philosopher is a magician, for by the aid of his unfolded intellect he accomplishes that which to the ignorant appears impossible. The rope suspended from nothing, up to which the naked Hindu boy scampers out of sight, teaches a valuable lesson to such as will inquire into its meaning. The question is often asked by the incredulous, but how can the rope stay there with nothing to hold it? The magician may answer, it is well supported, only you do not see the support. The unenlightened behold the accomplishments of the wise, but the methods by which such ends are attained are incomprehensible. The great truths of life are, like the magician's rope, held in their proper place by an unseen agent. Those unable to pierce the magician's subterfuge have eyes but see not. The millions to whom the concerns of the spirit are of no importance, who though continually surrounded by manifestations of universal intelligence are still oblivious to the whole pageantry, these are the truly blind, and their affliction is most grievous. In the allegory of the beanstalk, Jack is the initiate climbing upward toward perfection. The beanstalk has two significances. First, it is the secret doctrine which may grow up to its fullness in a single night, if that night be regarded as the duration of a soul in the mortal state. The beanstalk is further symbolic of the soul itself, up which consciousness must climb to discover the divine sphere from which it was exiled. It is noteworthy that when Jack reaches the upper world, where one would naturally expect beauty and tranquility to reign, he finds instead that his newly discovered sphere is the dwelling place of a fierce ogre who has the distressing proclivity of using strangers to supply the requirements of his menu. This giant is the ancient Demiurgus, the lord of the world, the royal autocrat, the vast tyrant who opposes all who would climb out of their materiality. He is selfishness, egotism, lust and hate. He is the epitome of all physical attachment and the appetites by which man is inclined toward the corporeal state. He is the giant of form, the hero of little minds, the fetish of the materialist, the god of those who worship through the senses alone, the supreme genius of the physical-minded, the magnificence to which fools bow down. Those who would escape the clutches of this giant must be wise indeed, for they must outwit themselves. In the ancient writings it is said that all will fail except a fortuitous destiny move with them, for skill will not suffice, prayers will be unavailing, and only the graciousness of the gods can ensure success. The subject of providence, or fortuitous destiny, is worthy of amplification at this point. One of the symbolic aphorisms of Pythagoras enjoined the disciple to abstain from the eating of beans. In its literal sense, there is seemingly no reason whatsoever for the admonition. Among the Greeks, however, beans were used in gambling and various games of chance, and the esoteric purpose of the admonition was to discharge man's reliance upon auspicious fortune, for he who consigns himself to the vagaries of chance in reality rests his fate upon his own integrity. This point is well made by Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust. How closely linked are luck and merit doth never to these fools occur, had they the philosopher's stone, I swear it, the stone would lack the philosopher. Man eternally struggles against the littleness that is himself, seeking to increase thereby the virtue of his own destiny. By such effort he frequently is able to maintain a higher footing than would otherwise be his natural right, for effort shall not be left unrewarded. If, however, man ceases his struggle and, doing nothing, trusts to Providence for an auspicious throw, that which is his own will know his face, and his reward shall be according to the insufficiency of himself. He who trusts himself to himself is brave indeed. Luck is not what it seems, for it connives with law to bring about the undoing of the foolish. The bit and bridle which Nemesis carries she slips over the head of the unwary. With blinders she takes away his vision, with chakrine lifts his head so high that he can no longer see the road, and then with loose rein drives him to destruction. But if the gods throw dice they cannot lose, for by reason of their very nature they are predestined to be the victors in every contest. Being as yet imperfect, however, man may never relax his vigilance or cease his struggle lest the imperfections which he seeks to outdistance overtake and humiliate him. What, then, is providence? It is like flowing into like, a quality reproducing its kind. Providence is not what we desire but what we actually are, and when we open the floodgates of fortune we shall simply be inundated by the torrents of similars, drowned in the substances of ourselves. By confronting destiny with effort we aspire to reach the ideal state of the higher self, but by appealing to fortune we place ourselves in the keeping of an impersonal fate that tortures us with our every defect and decrees us to abide by the measure of our smallest virtue. Thus, only in the truly great is the appeal to fortune to be relied upon, for the rest the law of labor is the only certain way. When it is written that man can succeed only when the gods are auspicious, it merely signifies that accomplishment depends upon the perfect mastery of self and the development of all parts, so that the flow of destiny brings to the disciple a propitious end to enterprise. Good fortune is not good to the foolish, nor is evil fortune evil to the wise. The foolish are incapable of benefiting from that which may in its own nature be good. Conversely, the wise are incapable of being injured by evil, for understanding renders all things usable. Thus, the identical so-called evil serves the philosopher while it undoes the thoughtless. The theory of evolution as expounded by the ancient sages does not agree with the Darwinian concept that life moves from one form or kind to another, but rather that life continually moves through the various states of itself. For example, plants do not move toward the perfection of man, nor does man incline toward the perfection of demons. Each of these orders is complete in itself, moving inevitably toward its own perfection in the perfect unfoldment of its own intrinsic characteristics. Growth, then, is that eternal procession of qualities marching to unity with themselves. Man, the personality, approaches man, the idea, and achieves perfection by unity with his own paradigm. Man reaches completion when he perfectly fills the mold or pattern that exists in the transcendental spheres. Evolution, then, is the fitting of a nature into its own archetype, and its end is attained when no longer any point of difference remains between the object as a transitory body and the object as a permanent idea. By growth we learn to become our essential selves, ordered after the precise image of our own divine prototype. That growth should be the process whereby man becomes reconciled to his own transcendental being may seem a strange thought, but to those who ponder the mystery, this truth becomes evident. Our path is rendered plain, we are destined by eternal providence to become the fullness of ourselves. Inclining to neither side or departing from our persons, we shall find perfection in the consummation of the destiny for which we were first conceived. The imitator must fail, because departing from self he would assume the virtues of another rather than his own. Each individual is allotted an end peculiar to himself and through uncounted millenniums moves inevitably toward that archetypal ideal patterned for him prior to his departure from universal self in quest of individuality. All creatures of a similar kind share a common origin and destiny. It is the peculiar purpose of men that they should become man and united in one nature constitute a complete being, that glorious assemblage of parts possessing three virtues, of which the first is completeness and the other two are the poles of this completeness, namely, rationality and permanence.
Thanks for watching the Wisdom Rocker. Don't forget to like, comment, and share.